I want to welcome everybody to the opening webinar of our Pros Who Know, our expert panel, what is going on, what it really takes to thrive in a parcel pandemonium. I'm Justin Kramer, and with me I've got several expert panelists. I'm going to go through real quick and then I'll have them introduce themselves. I've got Mark Taylor from Kerber. I've got Matt Chapa from FabFitFun and Low Budget Logistics. Megan Rudolph from Saddle Creek, and I am Justin Kramer from ProShip. Mark, would you mind spending a minute to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Mark Taylor. I'm the Senior Director of Transportation Consulting at Kerber. And what I do every day is to help my clients save money on their parcel programs with RFPs, analysis, and strategy sessions with road mapping on their parcel and freight programs.
Excellent. Matt, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Matthew Chapa. I'm the creator of Low Budget Logistics, which is a YouTube channel that is sort of my way of expounding on my 10 plus years of life in the in supply chain as a shipping manager for various companies. So the channel explains very detailed, nuanced concepts that you're all probably familiar with, but in easy to use, understandable ways using this felt board behind me.
Excellent. And Megan, could you give us an introduction?
Yep. Hi, I'm Megan Rudolph. I'm the Senior Director of Parcel Operations at Saddle Creek. I've been here for 3 years and I oversee all of our parcel operations nationwide. Focused on working with our clients to make sure that we're maximizing their consumers' delivery experience while also optimizing costs as well. So prior to that, it's been a little over 10 years in the e-commerce distribution industry, focused on lightweight residential shipments.
Excellent. Thank you all. And for those of you who don't know, I'm Justin Kramer, one of the co-founders of ProShip. I've spent 23 years focusing on nothing but small parcel shipment execution. Little housekeeping. One, you should know we do have handouts. They are available to you. One of those handouts actually is the deck that you're going to see today. We encourage you to pull those down. But also, while you're there, one of the things that make panels like this work is questions. So please feel free to add questions. We've got a group of personnel behind the scenes that are going to be collating those questions, getting them to us. If we can work them into a question that, if we can work them into something that already exists, we will. If not, we'll have Q&A at the end. Speaking of which, our agenda. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things today. We'll be going through that GRI. We'll be navigating peak and beyond. We are, well, effectively at the very beginning of peak. We'll be talking about leveraging data, which was the second most important thing on one of those polls that people were talking about a few minutes ago. We'll go through closing thoughts, and then we'll actually any of the questions that we weren't able to mix in, we'll go ahead and address those specifically at the end. All right, let's jump right in. So one of the things that we really wanted to talk about today is the GRI, or the general rate increase. And Matt, I'm going to start with you. How have GRIs evolved in recent years?
Yeah, so they've become a thing. Well, they've lived on as a thing, but they're really a way for carriers to exert their will and to kind of exert some leverage year over year without your ability to really change anything. So somewhat early on in my career as a shipping manager, I learned, like, if I'm going to try and pay less money, I can either like move more volume, right? This is the price and my price and volume graph here. If I want to lower costs, I either need to ship more volume or find a way to shift this line from where it is, which I can't change, to something else, which means like either I renegotiate the carrier contracts, which I can only do really every 3 years, or I find some other way of, providing leverage on my side. So it's been a thing. It's a known. It's kind of like a weight that you're going to just always have to carry, and so you have to be able to think differently and change your strategy if you really want to make some pretty concerted price, improvements.
Megan, what are your thoughts on it?
So I would say one of the things that's changed most over the last, several years as it relates to the GRI is how much we look at it as a perpetual strategy. Previously we looked at it more of a year-end process once it came out. But we're starting to see fees that are introduced throughout the year, the application of how some of those surcharges are applied. And you know, what we've really focused on is making sure that we have the right data and the right people to leverage that data. Right? So you can have good data all day long, but you need to know how to look at it and take, you know, have some actionable insights based on it. And you know, the fact that we work with so many different clients, we really have to understand that data to know, you know, this specific client based on their packaged characteristics is going to have, you know, an 11% increase, which is very different than that published 5.9% increase. And then what are our opportunities to mitigate any of that? And also, as we, you know, leverage some rate shopping within our system, you know, what does the next year look like as far as carrier planning? Because if an increase is unexpected, right, it might shift more volume to a different carrier. We need to make sure that we're working actively with our carriers to execute on that as well.
Excellent. And Mark, what do you want to add to our GRI conversation?
Yeah, so recently my team took a look at a 10-year history of how surcharges have changed. Building on what Megan is talking about, surcharges really are an important area to explore and analyze. So what we found is a couple of things. As most of us know, surcharges raise always at a higher rate than the announced GRI on transportation rates. So if, for instance, this year we have a 5.9% announced, that's on transportation rates. So it pertains to the weight zone metrics for each of the service levels. Whereas when we look at surcharges, and our team looked at 5 or 6 very prominent surcharges like the residential surcharge, the delivery area surcharge, additional handling. Some interesting insights we saw from that. First of all, we saw that on average, most of the surcharges I just mentioned raise somewhere between 7 and 8% as an average over that 10-year period. But one of the ones that breaks all the rules is additional handling surcharge, which this year is at a 20% year-over-year increase. So anyone that has additional handling, listen up, you need to mitigate some of those costs. But another interesting insight that we saw in looking at the 10-year as opposed to the announced 2024 changes is that this year is a little bit lower than the 10-year average. So what that says to me is that the carriers have finally started to pick up the fact that their increases year over year are not commensurate with where we are in the industry, with most retailers having flat or lower volume year over year and needing to mitigate some of those costs. So we have a lower announced GRI than last year, and it appears, at least from what we have studied so far, that the surcharges have raised at a lower rate than previous years.
But they've still raised, but lower raises,
That's right.
I guess, is a little bit of relief for us.
That's right.
And I think the other thing that we want to look at is there's so many of them. And that leads to one of the things that everybody should look at is making sure that you have a system that can capture all of them. And there's one surcharge we didn't really mention. I think the carriers have done a great job of telling us that's not their surcharge, and that's fuel surcharge. And that one changes up to weekly. So we've had an opportunity here. One of the questions have come in. I think it'll fit in here quite nicely. Chelsea from Kerber has asked, what can shippers do today to protect themselves from future rate increases? Has anybody got a thought on that one?
Yeah, so my go-to answer for that is to negotiate well, right? So there are terms and conditions that you can negotiate with parcel carriers that protect you from some certain surcharge increases. So those are worth talking through with your carriers. That would be the quick answer.
Yeah, Matt, do you want to add to that? I know that you've talked a lot about this on your channel.
Yeah, I think it's important to be somewhat cutthroat. as a shipping manager, and when you're going into these negotiations, you're not at risk of putting any of the larger carriers, these larger carriers, out of business by negotiating a bit more strongly or having more leverage on your side. So, like I said before, it's important to have leverage. You as a shipper, if you're individually sourced, you have little to no leverage. So, to me, it's most important to add out another carrier. So at least, at the very least, you're mitigating some of those, changes in surcharges, and you can, to some extent, penalize a carrier if they do too much. Then, hey, I'm going to continue to source with the lowest price carrier, the best option. This is what's most important to me. And so that's sort of, as long as you're pretty upfront with that strategy, carriers understand it, and they can sort of run with it and know, hey, it's business. I have to make money. You have to make money. I'm incentivized to drop my costs wherever I can. So I think having an extended carrier network is important, and not be single sourced, especially now that there's a lot of software that enables those types of things.
Great answer. Everybody should hold on to that carrier leverage part, because we've got a slide that's going to talk about it in a little bit. Megan, did you want to add anything to the question?
Matt kind of teed it up nicely for me, but having the system that allows you to pivot if you do need to add a carrier, right? So having a diversified mix of carriers and service levels, understanding as those change too, right? So sort codes get updated, that impacts transit, and making sure that you have a system that allows you to leverage, right? If a carrier's made some investments in their ground network, maybe there's more opportunity to leverage a ground network in an area previously you're shipping express.
Excellent, excellent. And last question on this slide, Mark, goes to you. Any tips for staying informed about rate changes?
Yeah, so the newsrooms of UPS and FedEx are a good source of information. They do make their official announcements typically on their newsroom pages. So just a natural follow is looking at those websites or following them online. The other source is to look for SMEs. There's a few on this webinar that you could follow, as well as folks like Nate Skyver, who is wonderful with his updates on LinkedIn. Often what you'll find on those SME follows is a little bit more information than you're going to get on a general post. And that's trying to break it down for the audience and help us all to really kind of get under the hood to see what's behind some of those changes.
Excellent, excellent. All right, Megan, the next one comes to you. What are some strategies for managing costs more effectively? I mean, let's face it, you have to help many, many customers manage costs. How do you all go about it?
So fortunately, we have a team on staff of subject matter experts that understand parcel. They understand the nuances of parcel. Not everyone needs that level of expertise. So leveraging people in your network that are putting out ebooks and publishing this information, that are doing the research for you. We know Mark mentioned the people on this call. There's a lot of great content creators as well that are pushing things out there. I would also recommend leveraging your carriers. So building really strong relationships with the carriers. So you can have strategic meetings. Not every conversation needs to be about negotiation. Most of them should be, right? But making sure that they're bringing the right people to the table that can talk about what do their future strategies look like. Some of the national carriers, those conversations might be a little bit leaner just because a lot of that's posted through their earning reports. But the regionals and work share partners, they really want to understand how shippers can best leverage their network, and they're willing to share and work with you to make sure that you're putting a win-win solution in place, right? So having the right partners that are going to give you that information, and then again, just building the right portfolio of services that are going to meet your customers' needs. If you're in like a budget business and you have low-cost products, right? What's going to be the right fit for that versus someone that's in fast fashion and average order value of over 300? What are your consumers' expectations, and making sure you're having you have the services to meet all of those needs.
Excellent. The last thing I want to talk about before we move on to the next section is the fact that the carriers have made a marketing change. For the last couple of years, we've heard peak season surcharge, and now we're hearing demand surcharges. So far this year, they've said, no, these are only going to apply at peak. Maybe it's the pessimist in me, but I can see how that allows them to determine that any peak that a shipper might have, let's say you normally sell things at the beginning of spring because you're pool or sports or something of that nature, that there's a possibility then that based upon the way you ship another 10 months of the year, that you may see those demand surcharges as part of it. I'm just going to open this one up to the panel here. Anybody have any thoughts on the demand surcharges? Am I just being a pessimist here? What do y'all think?
No, I think you're more of a realist than a pessimist, because especially those of us on the panel have lived through this with our clients and in our programs. Since 2020, the carriers have gotten a bit addicted to the surcharge revenue that they were able to call upon when they actually did have capacity constraints. And calling it a demand surcharge is, I think, their euphemistic way of saying that we can invoke this whenever we wish to. Maybe there's going to be a Mother's Day peak. Maybe there's going to be some other events that would invoke that demand surcharge.
I'm going to dovetail off of Mark here, and I think what will be most important to me as I'm negotiating a new contract or going into a new year where demand surcharges become a thing, and that demand becomes a very hazy definition. I would want it very clearly defined, right? They have teams of lawyers that can answer that question, and I want them to answer that for me so that I know as a shipper when I should expect to see an impact into my cost per order in my shipping. So I live in the South, I live in Texas. Hurricanes are a thing down here, and if demand surcharges can apply when there's a hurricane that hits the Gulf Coast, I need to know about it so that I can inform my superiors, my executive teams. So that's important, and I want to know kind of the dictates of like, hey, when does it turn on? How early do you have to notify me that I'm going to get hit by this new surcharge? And so, as Megan said, all of that comes from like having and building a good relationship with your carrier, with your salesperson, and knowing and having those conversations early upstream so that you're not, surprised when they happen, in summer. It shouldn't be a peak in summer.
Excellent. Megan, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, Mark mentioned something. The carriers have been, bullish throughout the history just because it's a market that's lacked competition. We're starting to see some more competitors enter the market, and finding that right mix is driving more competition. But once that something's introduced, I can't say in any of my years of experience I've seen them walk it back, right? So once they've captured that revenue, they're going to continue to do so. And I think that it's important for shippers to understand, when they have an opportunity to be more aggressive in their negotiation tactics, and make sure that they're negotiating where it makes the most sense, right? If don't spend too much time negotiating on something that's not going to drive significant savings. So knowing, going back to that data piece, which lever should I pull? Because the carriers still hold quite a bit of power in these conversations.
I'm going to put one other thing about that. It's not so much about demand-based surcharges, but what we are hearing is that some of the newer, some of the carriers that are just being created now are going to demand-based pricing overall. And what that means is that if they know they're going to get X number of packages tomorrow, the cost will be X. And if they get more packages, they might actually lower the overall cost because they're able to hire more trucks, drive more line hauls, things of that nature associated with it. So it's going to be a very interesting half decade coming forward here as the carriers really do try some unique things when it comes to pricing. But you know what? It's not a half decade from now yet. It is the beginning of peak. And let's go ahead and talk about some key challenges we might be facing this peak. Matt, let's go ahead and start with you. As somebody who's worked for a lot of retailers, what challenges do you feel everybody's about to face?
Well, I'm going to start with the good news. And the good news, at least, is that we expect to not see as much, demand and capacity constraints as we had, in 2020 and 21. Sort of tapered off for lots of reasons. Good news for shippers. But I think for me, when I go into a peak season, my concern is always with the unknown and the things that I can't control for. So for me, like weather is always a thing, right? The Northeast always gets some sort of snow. And there's just other times that carriers, even when capacities are relatively normal and predictable, they still have gridlock and some major sortation because something goes out or a major piece of infrastructure might fail or something happens. So those are the things that I'm really concerned about. And the way that I at least mitigate them, as I've sort of been, harping on this whole time, is having another carrier to shift volume to, so at least you can continue to process volume out, is important as you roll into the peak season. So you may not be as efficient, you need to be more resilient, and that's sort of what matters during peak, is just getting that volume out.
So Mark, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think that some specific challenges that we're going to see for this year have to do with labor, and we're watching that very closely as different negotiations with unions continue, particularly for the ports and the West Coast situation there, as well as the United Auto Workers. Some of those things can and will cause supply chain disruption, and that has been seen to make some volatility in the parcel networks as well. But it's also a matter of just really DC planning and the labor associated with actually touching boxes as well. I think that there continue to be challenges in that regard, and I'm sure that Megan and Matt have seen that play out.
Yeah, I just want to add really quick when you talked about the port problem, and that's being exacerbated by record low rainfall across the Panama Canal and the reduction in depth that they're allowing certain ships to pass through. So, Megan, do you want to continue to add to the key challenges you feel your customers are going to face?
Sure. I would say that I'm cautiously optimistic. Cautious because I think everyone on this call probably has war stories over the last decade of some of those peaks that we could talk about over coffee for a while. But looking at this peak, I would say we're cautiously optimistic. And what we're looking at is what are the things within our control, right? And a lot of that is planning. We're working with our clients 6 to 9 months out because by then, they've been working with their procurement team to understand what their holiday peak is going to look like. And then we're taking that data back to our carriers. And we're also planning for that within the labor needs within our warehouse. And as a 3PL, we're in a unique position. We look at seasonality in our buildings because not all peaks are holiday peaks. And make sure that we can do what we can to, instead of looking at a 5x ratio going into the holiday, maybe it looks closer to 2 to 3x. And then finally, in our key markets where we're driving a significant amount of volumes, we have the opportunity to leverage automation and just reduce that dependency on manual labor.
Yeah, you're definitely right about capacity. That's definitely one of the things that we've seen in 2020 when the pandemic first hit. There was clearly negative capacity. Nobody had capacity. Things were sitting on the dock for days waiting for a trailer to pull them. In 2021, we actually saw that there was about 5 million parcels a day worth of excess capacity. The problem, and Matt, you kind of mentioned it, is where was that capacity? Was it on the West Coast today? Was it in the center of the country? Where was it? And then in 2022, I think that our predictions of everything continuing to go up kind of faltered, and many people saw a lot of excess capacity most of the time. Okay, and as we roll into the 2023 peak, I'm not hearing anybody too concerned about capacity that wasn't concerned about capacity in 2018 and 2019. There's always mega large retailers, mega large 3PLs out there that their ability to shift from one carrier to another can be a benefit for everybody. But we are not expecting a whole lot of packages being left on the dock. All right. Let's talk about best practices so that we can prepare here. Matt, looks like I'm going back to you on this one. Can you talk about some of the best practices that you as an individual retailer, without the assistance of a 3PL and a lot of other external capacity, have been able to use?
Yeah, the best practice is always communication. Megan has hit that nail correctly on the head. Forecast, 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 communicate those volumes amongst your team. I know that we would start, right, when I was at a very traditional e-commerce retailer, we would start peak planning communications in like July for our expected demands in October and November. So you can't communicate enough. Well, you can't communicate enough. It's important to communicate as much as possible with everyone what the expected volumes are, and as they might shift, you need to be re-communicating those things. So you're right. If you have some sort of demand shaping event, like a Prime Day or something like that, and you might reforecast as a result of what those sales are, it's important to reforecast those numbers back to your carrier so they know what capacity they might need, whether up or down. And so having that level of communication across everyone is so important. It cannot be understated.
Role of regional carriers, have you changed your thought process on that?
Yeah. So the other two things I'm going to harp on, carriers. Yes. When I started kind of in the logistics world, e-commerce, you had three options. You could use the post office, UPS, or FedEx, maybe DHL if you were doing business. Now there's a lot more, and the regional carriers, or even the smaller ones, are much more in tune with an e-commerce customer, where before they might have things where they're going to necessarily toss a package onto someone's doorstep and provide a negative customer experience with that final delivery. They've come a long ways. They're beyond the point where I have to coach an entire carrier on how to deliver a package via e-commerce. So they're much better. They have a lot more options, and they generally are much better priced. And that's a great way to provide more leverage and just sort of have a downstream effect for you as a shipping manager year round.
Excellent. Yeah. To add to that, the reality is in the beginning of the pandemic, all the non-big carriers combined for only about 200 million shipments a year, right? As we saw it last year, they did 500 million shipments. Okay. That's some pretty decent growth. Yes, there's a lot of new carriers out there, but what I'll also say is that from ProShip side, we obviously service a very large number of very large shippers, whether they be 3PLs, manufacturers, or retail. We have seen that the larger our shipper is, the more likely they are to mix in the non-traditional carriers, not the big four. And I'm now including Amazon, by the way, as part of the big four: UPS, FedEx, Post Office, and Amazon. So just a little thing to note there. Now, my last question on this slide, Mark, I'm going to go to you. We've got this great graph here about basically leveraging who has the leverage at any point in time. Said we'd get back to this. Can you explain this graph to our listeners?
Sure. And an additional website to follow, if you don't already, for industry updates is FreightWaves. They curate a lot of great content, and Mark has done a wonderful job of getting articles and contributors that really help to understand what's going on. And in particular, FreightWaves has created a supply chain pricing power index. That's what this graph represents. The higher the value, the more leverage that the carriers had for negotiating freight pricing, inclusive of parcel and all the modes. So this really tells the story. In the graph, Justin graphed with his hands what what happened over the course of the pandemic, but this really tells that story. If you look at 2020, we went into a carrier leveraged environment with a very high index for 2 years, and all of us felt that as we helped clients to negotiate, as we negotiated programs ourselves. And then 22, we started to see this sort of precipitate downward into more of an environment where shippers had a bit of leverage to now go back to their carriers, negotiate some better pricing, cut down some of the impacts of those high surcharge increases that we talked about previously. And so right now where we sit at the end of 2023 is that we're in either a shipper leveraged or maybe a neutral environment, much more like it was when we look at 2018 and 2019, where there is some negotiating power with our shippers. And this fits into the overall environment that we've all been talking about. This is supply, this is economics 101, supply and demand, right? When the demand exceeded the capacity and the supply, then we had all of this leverage go to the carriers. And now that we see these things decrease year over year, and now we almost have an excess of capacity in the carrier networks. Now it's somewhere in a better place from a shipper's perspective.
Excellent. Let's stay with you here and let's talk about, I mean, one of the things we touched on earlier, which is metrics, KPI, and data. What would you track and what are the benefits of tracking that?
Yeah, 100% agree with Megan that it all starts with data, and that's detailed data that gives you really, I hate to say this, but you have to be very comprehensive and granular to enable you to kind of head off some of the challenges that we've talked about. And what I think is important as shippers go into peak is really starts after the previous peak, right? It's establishing the baseline for your program. And there are two fundamental KPIs that I think that folks ought to be tracking: on-time service and cost per package by service. Because often those are sort of like the temperature. You would have to dig in. If you see a high temperature reading, right, then you have to go into more diagnostics to see what's wrong with the patient. Those two are key indicators of, is my cost going up or is my on-time delivery slipping? Because as you go into peak, that's when a lot of, especially e-commerce and retailers, are stressed in their programs. As we stress the carriers with more volume, do those statistics change? And so we need to be able to set the baseline prior to peak, evaluate it and change it dynamically within the peak time period, and then have an excellent post-mortem of KPIs and statistics after the peak to evaluate performance.
Excellent, excellent. Matt, coming back to you over here with alternate delivery strategies. I think a lot of people just think, you know what, I'm going to take my packages to this building, I'm going to turn them over. Maybe I'll get lucky, a truck will come to me and pick them up. What are my other options?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of been the way that we've all done it for a long time. Is I don't want to move out of my warehouse. I want to just have you come pick up for me. I think there's a lot of opportunity in being a bit more creative. So I think what I've seen, right, there may be a regional carrier that you want to ship with. Right? Say you're on the East Coast and you want to ship to the West Coast, and aside from on track now doing both, there may be an option where you want to use a carrier, but they don't necessarily pick up where you're at. And I think that's where you are able to leverage other markets and transportation to get your stuff where it needs to be for an overall lower price. So right now we're seeing the FTL and LTL markets coming down right in the same way that the capacity is above demand. There's a lot more capacity in the LTL and FTL market. So you can get good rates to ship volume and do the injection yourself. It may take a little bit more communication. You may have another 2 or 3 people to talk to, but you can really see a lot of a lot of benefit from doing that. You can add more carriers to your mix. You can add, do all the like positive things, competition, negotiations, those types of things. It does require a level of expertise and understanding of how to do those things. So if you're going to go that way, I'd recommend going to a freight broker to do a type of zone skipping. But there's a lot of new kind of concepts that are out there. There's a lot of gig places that are coming up right now to do deliveries via gig, way lower cost. So there's a lot of more options. Think outside the box and see where your customers are and how to get products to them, on time and efficiently at a low cost. There's lots of options and opportunities there in the market.
Yeah, I think I tried to coin a term a couple of years ago. It never caught on though. Multi-leg shipping, right? And that idea is that it could start all the way overseas in manufacturing, where you have to commission an LTL carrier to bring it to a port. Then you have to commission an ocean carrier to get it across, and then you need another LTL carrier, and then finally you need to break bulk and actually break it out into small parcels to actually be received, right? And maybe there's even a line haul involved there. So we've seen, and many of us in the industry, that multi-leg shipment that I talked about, we know that exists. It's common knowledge to us. We may only want to control a certain portion of it. And I will say that I've seen two companies out there now that are trying to create a marketplace around all of those legs. So you can start in India and negotiate the entire path of that particular order, from a bulk pallet, maybe an entire container, all the way across. So I think it's going to be, again, I say the next half decade is going to be very interesting for those in this industry, because we're going to see a lot of things being tried. There's going to be some successes, there's going to be some failures, and there's going to be a lot of lessons learned around how carriers can get more creative, and those of us who are shippers will have more opportunities as to when to take advantage of them. But of course, Matt, as you mentioned, zone skipping is something that has been around, I think, as long as UPS has. So,
yeah,
right.
I think I did a video, Justin, just a really quick, I did a video on drop shipping receipt. I mean, after I finished filming, I was like, man, why doesn't every e-commerce retailer do that? They should just be shipping directly from their manufacturers all the time. It would save so much money. So I think technology is going to enable a lot of upheaval in the market really soon.
Definitely. All right, let's move to our last major topic, which is leveraging data-driven decision-making. Clearly something we've been talking a lot about today. Megan, we're gonna start with you on this one. You guys collect a lot of data to help your customers. What do you see as the role of data in making informed shipping decisions?
I think it's the most important role in the shipment execution process. So if you want to allow your system to make decisions for you, that data needs to be accurate and updated, as updates occur, down to the SKU level, right? So starting at building an order, right, making sure that the weights and the dimensions of each SKU are accurate, so you can maximize the carton that it's shipping in, and make sure that you're minimizing dim weight, or at least reducing the amount of billable weight. Leveraging some cartonization or cubing software to pick the most efficient box size or poly mailer. And then once you have that, understanding, from the order, how fast does it need to get there? Does it need to deliver by Friday, or do you have a range of 2 to 5 days? And then looking at all of the options within your system that pick the most cost-effective option that gets it there within the time frame. And you can spend a significant amount of time getting an aggressive contract with the carriers. That's essential. But optimizing through data, you're looking at saving 20 to 30% through optimization is where the real opportunity lies. So we continue to push the importance of data. I think I've said it probably too many times on this call, the word data, but just driving home the importance of that.
Excellent. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think we set out to make a data-driven conversation, but it just permeates everything we do in the logistics world. Mark, let's move over to you. The role of data.
Yeah, and just to kind of elaborate a little bit more on what I had said previously, for those different phases of looking at peak data. You know, as you're going in, you can make lots of great plans based on historical data, but you have to have that collected and accessible to you in order to do that, right? So looking year over year, looking at expectations is very helpful in developing robust plans. And once you get inside of peak, what the best programs do is they are dynamically changing when they see some of their KPIs change. They can do a Monday morning quarterback or even a Tuesday morning quarterback. A daily change based on what they're seeing happen. So if I look at last week's invoice data and I see that my cost is going up, what solutions might I need to change to mitigate some of the costs that I'm seeing? Or if my on-time delivery is taking a hit from last week, do I need to use a carrier that is going to guarantee the service, especially as I get towards late in the season, Christmas Eve, etc.? So dynamically changing during peak requires you to have that data and have it in a way that you can take action on it immediately without having to spend time crunching it. So those actionable insights you need to have at your fingertips while you're going through your actual peak period.
Excellent. And Matt, you've got some very specific advice for us with all this data.
Yeah, so be immersed in it. Know what those numbers are. As Mark said, going into peak, know what those numbers look like, what your cost per order are. But like as you're analyzing the data, know what you want to pull out of it. Know what you're asking, and have that question in your mind as you're looking through it, because we can get so bogged down in the multitude of surcharges and how many times those are occurring and what they're costing, what percent of the order, and all of those different things can come down, and you can really get sidetracked. And you can find yourself looking at 16 pivot tables and going, I forgot what I even wanted to know. So have that question in your mind before you go into it, and then just pull the data that will relate to that answer. Now, sometimes you might find that golden nugget that you didn't think of as you're sort of sifting through the world of data. But knowing that question that you want to answer will, one, save time, which we all need during peak, and will allow you to pull the right data at the right time.
Excellent. So my thing is accuracy of data. I think every customer, you need to have good measurements of volume, as Megan described, costs, etc., because you need to pass this to the rest of your enterprise software stack, right? And an order management system isn't going to do a great job being able to source something if you don't have great inventory control. It's not going to be able to work with the multi-carrier shipping software to determine if I have to split this order, what the most cost-effective way to meet customers' expectation is if we don't have great data, right? So not to beat a dead horse there, because if you've listened to me more than once, you'll hear me say that. But let's go ahead and let's talk about technologies and tools that enable this. And Matt, I'm going to go back to you on this. How do I enable a data-driven strategy if I'm a shipper?
First off, you start by using what you got, right? Low budget logistics is not only the name of my channel, it's the mentality that we all sort of operate under. And so you got to, whatever tools you have available right now, utilize them. Maybe look at them more creatively to find what you might have. If you literally just have Excel, then hey, you've got a pretty solid foundation to really utilize. Other than that, if you have some parcel auditing, they generally keep your data around for you. They're able to parse it out for you and give it to you in ways that you can manage. Or if you have some sort of updated software tools like that, you can really kind of get really detailed. But really all you need to know is maybe 5 different things and monitor those really closely. So use what you have. Don't get too crazy. Don't worry about the next AI revolution and what machine learning can do for you. Start with what you have and then extrapolate on that. Is sort of like the best advice I can give anyone who has 0 budget to do anything.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Megan, my last. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, you know, Matt, if folks need visibility solutions, I know a guy. All right.
Definitely, definitely. Megan, my last open question goes to you, and that is, can you give us some examples of some success that y'all have seen with data-driven initiatives?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say over the last 2 years, one of the biggest shifts is, previously having all of this data roll up into more control tower views and dashboards. Unfortunately, though, that data at that point is static, and you can't make the dynamic decisions to Mark's point earlier. And so what we've done is transitioned, the two biggest metrics when it comes to Parcel are how much does it cost and how fast is it, right? So cost and transit, and making investments and getting real-time visibility to both of those to make sure that we can make those dynamic decisions, because that's what the carriers have kind of pushed us to do, right? Previously, we could set a strategy based on a fiscal year or a calendar year, based on when those GRIs came out. But as new fees are introduced, we need to be able to pivot and adapt more or faster. And so having that real-time analytics, we still have the control tower view, that's important, but being able to drill in at the package level as it's happening has become most important.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you all. We're going to give you each a minute to do a closing thought here, and then we'll get to our questions that are piling up. Megan, let's go ahead and start with you. 60 seconds. What do you want the audience to take away from today's webinar?
Yeah, I would say leverage people in your network, or bring on people if you have a need that justifies having a subject matter expert in-house, do that. But also leverage your partners. So systems, right? Working with somebody that understands Parcel is extremely important. Working with carriers and aligning with the right carrier reps, and letting the experts be the experts. We have clients that are really focused on closing the gap in fast fashion between comfort and style, and they want to partner with us to do the operations and the final mile piece, right? And so making sure that focusing where your strengths are, and then leveraging the experts that are available to you through webinars, content that's being posted, and then the systems team, or having the right systems team in place as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Mark, your 60 seconds of what people should take away.
Yeah, so I really think that continuous improvement for peak performance comes in setting a strategy, tracking towards it, and reevaluating after the event in order to be able to recognize really that continuous improvement cycle getting better year over year, because this certainly becomes more complex and new situations come up all of the time. But the more experience that we have in improving these and evaluating against strategies, the better.
Excellent. And last but not least, Matt, what is your takeaway?
I'm going to dust off a mark here. So be creative in the things, right? As you're doing your after actions, as you're going through peak, as you've created a plan and you don't want to throw it away, but you kind of have to, be creative in your solutions. There's a lot more things out there now that will enable you to do a lot more operations. So the technology enables you to do a lot now. And I think that shippers who are not creative are going to find themselves really, behind track really quickly.
Oddly enough, I am going to give a piece of advice that doesn't include any data, but actually is going to require people to write stuff down. I always give this type of advice this time of year. We are at the beginning of peak. If you are in the logistics world, if you know you're going to need to make changes next year, even if you don't know you're going to need to make changes here, I recommend once a week you write down what's working, what's not working, what completely is not working. If you do that weekly, at the end of the season, you'll have a great recording of what you don't want to throw away and what was the most negative impact for you. Okay, and that odd bubble came up for me again. All right, that being said, remember everybody, we're about to go into questions. We do want to ensure that you've looked at the handouts and you can add questions if you want to. So with that in mind, also, if you want to contact any of the members of this panel, we've got contact information up here. Remember, this slide deck is in the handout, so you can download it and have all that information. All right, let's go ahead and get started here. Ship Matrix, Joshua from Ship Matrix says, how do major carriers like UPS and FedEx plan to sustain their competitiveness amidst growing network capacity, rising expenses, and the emergence of new industry players like Amazon and Walmart? Anybody want to take that one?
I'll jump in. I would say, what we're seeing with FedEx's Network 2.0 is a telltale sign, I think, of the changes, right? I think that we're going to expect some bumps along the way, but I think that FedEx will be in a more favorable position to compete in areas where maybe previously UPS had an advantage. So I think that their decision to merge those networks, right, and roll up under one operating company is something we'll continue to see through the various carriers. And then, how much of an impact are the new players going to have? They still have, a small portion of the market share, but they continue to make a big impact. So I would continue to see more competition driven by the new players in the market.
Matt, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that FedEx and UPS are name brands, and they're going to play a different game. They're not pricing themselves as a commodity, at least not most of their offerings. They have SurePost and SmartPost, but they're not a commodity service, and they know that. And I think they're going to play that game and say, hey, we're not that. We don't want to be that. We're going to be, brand. You're going to get a different, service level, and that's sort of the conversations that I've had with those reps. Is we're playing a different game.
I think my takeaway on all this, or the thing that people need to remember, is this isn't two technology companies competing against one another. We're not going to see the collapse of one company or the other in rapid form, probably not. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that these are capital companies with the purchase of their trailers, their trucks, their sorting facilities, the land associated with it, and all the labor that's required for it. So though I do think we're going to see what is a fast change within the logistics market, I caution people against equating the technology market with the logistics market. Mark, did you want to add anything to that?
No, Justin, I think you're spot on with your assessment of why there aren't more substantial competitors inside of the parcel industry. And that's because it takes a lot of money, a lot of time to develop a national network. I mean, I can remember a time, and I'm going to sound like grandpa here, but I can remember a time in which FedEx Ground did not have 100% national coverage. So it's just been in the last 20 years that has happened. And so for any of the carriers coming up, they really do have that sort of capital mountain to climb in order to have the national coverage and all the bells and whistles that these two carriers that have been around 50 and 100 years have built up.
All right, we've got time for one more question here. Otherwise, we'll end up going over. Macon from Amplifier says, how do you handle a client going over or under plan? Megan, I think that one goes to you, though we're going to tweak this and I'm going to throw it over to Mark and Matt afterwards. But how do you handle if I tell you I'm going to need 5,000 shipments a day, what my new widget is going to go gangbusters, right? And I only sell 1,000 a day, or it really does go gangbusters. Now you need to ship 10,000 units for me.
Yeah, so that's a great question. When a client goes under, what we're doing is we're taking information back to them to let them know. We're also working with our carriers as orders are coming in, right, to make sure that we're adjusting as needed. And that goes for over as well. And it's not necessarily just volume, it's also service mix too, right? If you are expecting 5,000 shipments that are going to go ground, that's very different than needing 5,000 shipments that are going to go over, express overnight. So working closely with the carriers, understanding that we need to be flexible, right? You know, if a client repeatedly has those challenges, that we'll deal with those as a one-off, but making sure that we can provide enough information to our clients based on, you know, maybe previous promotions, or if it's a new client, giving them as much data as possible to take back to their procurement team, and so they can better forecast as well. So really collaborating with them, and understanding what can we do in terms of the data that we're gathering throughout the order life cycle to empower them for better forecasting.
Okay. So I'm going to tweak the question a little bit for Mark and Matt. What if you're a shipper and you find yourself not getting close to what you expect, that capacity that you asked for your carriers? Is there anything you all usually would recommend a customer do in that situation?
Well, that's certainly a difficult one to spin on a dime on during the peak period. So my sermon about that would be to start early, building out the flexibility that you need in your programs. I think the pandemic taught all of us that carrier diversity is the key to business continuance. And we saw strategies change a lot during that time frame. Folks that wouldn't have considered a second carrier or a regional carrier previously absolutely did, to find the capacity that they needed during the pandemic. So maybe one silver lining from that whole period that we all wish we could have fast forwarded through is carrier diversity really does start with planning prior to all these peak events to make you flexible enough, as Megan mentioned, to absorb all of the differences.
All right, Matt, your thought? Under, over?
I really wanted Megan to answer that you slap them with a demand fee or with a demand surcharge, but okay, missed opportunities. For me, right, if I'm, let's say worst case scenario, I go under forecast, I'm communicating every day, right? I'm on the phone with my carriers literally every day as I go into peak. So they know what's going on. And I've probably provided them with a day-by-day forecast for orders and volume. So if we're not meeting it, then we'll have the conversations as soon as I start to notice we're a little bit low, we're a little bit light. If we're going over forecast and we are exceeding what's going on, then I'll work with that same carrier to maybe find an alternate injection point. Again, zone skipping in a way. So I live in Austin. Dallas and Houston are not that far away. So they might have a different level of capacity at a different market. And you might be injecting into a different place if you start to exceed what that hub might be able to process for you.
Excellent. All right, and with that, Megan, Mark, Matt, 3M, I guess. Thank you all for attending today. I'd like to thank our audience for attending. This will be released later, so if you have a colleague who didn't get an opportunity to listen, you could be able to share that with them. But that being said, thank you all for attending. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.